All right, welcome everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. So thanks for coming for this convocation event. So most of you know who I am, Joseph Stover. I teach mathematics here. And this is an event that is of special significance to me. So maybe a few of you I've spoken to your philosophy or religion courses about my experience with Hinduism. And so this is a really special event for me. But so Hridayananda H.D.Goswami has been studying philosophy and religion for half of a century. That makes sense.
Started very, very young.
And we just call him Acharya Dev, so that's a little bit easier to. So Acharya Dev, it's a little bit easier to pronounce, or just Goswami simply. So he has a PhD in Sanskrit and Indian studies from Harvard, and has traveled the world lecturing, speaking at colleges, world leaders, opening new centers, and initiating disciples, actually. So he's a senior leader and initiating guru in the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, which was started by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada in '66. And actually, Acharya Dev has just released a new sort of translation of the Bhagavad Gita with a very unique explanation. Studying Sanskrit, he does a great job at explaining the literal translation. Has actually started a new organization called Krishna West in order to make Hindu philosophy more accessible to people of a Western upbringing. And so thanks again for being here, and without delay, please welcome Acharya Dev.
Thank you very much for coming. And I just wanted to begin by saying that you have a beautiful campus, and of course I've traveled a lot around the world, and there's just nothing like the American Liberal Arts College with these beautiful campuses. It's really great, so I think we're all fortunate to be here right now. In discussing a spiritual tradition, I guess when spiritual traditions are not paying attention, they become just religious traditions, but I would like to introduce some philosophical notions, which I think should frame a discussion of religion in general, or spirituality in general, especially because we live, in case you didn't notice, in a very materialistic age. And so, I mean, for example, if you believe something that's not true, or if you don't believe something that is true, that's equally pernicious if your goal is knowledge. So, for example, if you don't believe the earth is round, or that the earth goes around the sun, that's an example of doubting something that is true. So getting something right epistemologically, to doubt what is true or to believe what is not true are equally a problem. And yet, in our culture, we study little linguistic analysis here, we have the ubiquitous phrase, everyone's heard of blind doubt. No one wants to be guilty of blind doubt. But we don't have the balancing term blind faith. We have blind faith, but we don't have the term blind doubt. So if our culture was actually objective, the terms blind faith and blind doubt would have the same cultural impact, but they don't. So in the age we live in, if you doubt spiritual things, that is intellectually respectable, even if you don't give good reasons. And if you believe in something spiritual, that is very suspicious, even if you have good reasons. So, because all of us are operating within a particular historical period in which our culture is tilted, especially in the academy, actually, not here, I'm sure, at Lyon, but in the great universities of the world, it's not objective. It's actually tilted toward a particular metaphysical philosophy called materialism, that only material things are the really real. So because we're all existing within that historical context, I want to introduce some ideas which you may already know, so be kind to me, I'm a senior citizen. So one point I wanted to make is that, to use Aristotle's terms, there is obviously the physical world. You know, birds, bees, desks, and screwdrivers. There's a physical world, but then Aristotle, when he's talking about things beyond the physical, he used the term metaphysical, from the Greek meta, that which comes after, or that which is beyond. So the first point I want to make is that human life is necessarily, unavoidably metaphysical. And therefore, if you don't, what I'd like to say is philosophy is like psychology. Even if you don't study it, you have one. So, for example, an example of a purely metaphysical, one could really say almost religious idea, is equality. The idea that we should ignore all of the physical aspects. Someone gets a higher SAT score, someone can run faster, someone's a better artist, someone has more money, and someone less. Yet despite all the obvious physical differences, our whole political system, in fact, the political system that we have very humbly and generously given to the rest of the world. I saw a bumper sticker actually at Ohio University that said, if you don't cooperate with America, we're going to bring democracy to your country. So, anyway, so things like equality. I mean, Jefferson, anyway, I don't want to go too far, but Jefferson was very smart. What is it Kennedy once said, that when he had a bunch of Nobel laureates in the White House for dinner, this was the greatest gathering of intelligence at the White House since Thomas Jefferson dined alone. So Jefferson knew his Hume. Hume was a Scottish philosopher who said that basically, I think the real essence of Hume's contribution is you cannot derive a metaphysical fact from a physical fact. In other words, let's say someone commits an obvious evil act, like harming an innocent person with no extenuating circumstances. It wasn't that, famous example they give in college classes where if you push a fat man onto a railroad track, stopping the train, you'll save the lives of 100 children. It's nothing like that. It's just gratuitous harm of an innocent person. And so if you study that act physically in the sense of the body movements, the time, all the criminal forensic, you can study everything about that act. You will not find in any material analysis the evil of it. And so Hume is saying that a material situation or event or condition does not logically produce a metaphysical fact, which is a value, namely that it's good or bad. Jefferson knew that, actually. And therefore, in the DOI, the Declaration of Independence, he began by saying we hold these truths to be self-evident, because self-evident is a technical term in philosophy, epistemology, saying, which also comes from Aristotle, this is Aristotle Day, that Aristotle said that when you're trying to prove something, you can be pushed into an infinite regress of proofs. And the way you escape that is that you have to declare that something is self-evident, it proves itself. Like, for example, let's say you claim water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, isn't it? Yeah. So to prove it, you put a pot on the stove, water, thermometer, voila, it boiled. No, someone could say, I don't believe that's pure water. I don't believe that's pure mercury. So you have to test the water and the mercury. Then you have to test the water testing chemicals. And so there's an infinite regress until you declare something is self-evident. For example, in empirical science, they also, this is epistemology that's technically called foundationalism. You have to have a self-evident starting point for any system of knowledge. So in empirical science, their self-evident assumption is there's really a world out there. Because obviously you can't use empirical science to prove there's a real world. That's egregious circular reasoning. So, which means that you give as evidence the thing you're trying to prove. So, anyway, so I'm bringing all this up, not just because at my age I forget what I said 5 minutes ago, but also because I wanted to make the point that you cannot avoid the fact that consciously or unconsciously, you will take a metaphysical position. And so here's an example of it. What's that?
Do you need some chalk?
Oh, chalk, okay.
Oh, no, I'm sorry, I was just wondering.
Oh, yeah. Every free act is metaphysical in this sense. When you, for example, obviously this morning, all of you chose to get out of bed or whatever you sleep on. So So the point here is that you had another choice, not to get up. So the fact that we all chose to get up or to come here right now is because of values we have. Because, because we have certain values, we valued getting up more than not getting up. And a value is metaphysical. So actually intentional behavior is entirely based on a system of metaphysical values, because values are not physical things. You can't collect, like here's 3 blue values, here's 5 red ones, and so on. So intentional behavior, free will itself, is or entails metaphysical assumptions. That's one point I wanted to make. And so therefore, the idea of a world in which, how should I put it? The idea of a world in which the gatekeepers of knowledge are empiricists, that nothing can be accepted as certain. You can't really claim you know anything unless it is certified, by the materialists, is absurd. Because if you say that nothing can be accepted as objectively true unless it's empirically certified, it's obviously what's called in philosophy self-referential incoherence, because that statement cannot be empirically demonstrated. And so it's very silly. So therefore, it's this epistemological imperialism, the idea that one group of people claim they know all about the world. Now, consider the things that we consider most important in life: equality, freedom, justice, love, compassion. Those are all metaphysical. And therefore, a system of knowledge which by its own ground rules cannot talk about metaphysical things a priori, can never give a complete description of the universe. And so, as long as, in other words, if you think that justice is a real thing, because think of the monstrous consequences. If someone says, well, actually, this person just massacred 50 children, but, isn't it amazing how evolution neurologically wired us to think that's bad? Do you realize how monstrous that is? So, ultimately, if you were a real materialist, you'd have to say, to be consistent, that there's nothing morally bad. It is not bad to kill innocent people. Massacres are not bad, racism, anything, rape. It's not really bad. We're just wired that way because societies that thought they were bad, their gene pools prospered more or something. So materialism, if you really take it to its logical consequences, is monstrous. And the reason that society, has not become completely monstrous and materialistic, not completely, is because most scientists are hypocrites. And therefore, although they're methodological atheists in the real world, they actually care about their children, and they actually, and so on and so forth. So what this is really about is having a rational, consistent view of life. So again, that point that any materialistic system of thought, whether it's empirical science, whatever, by definition, cannot give a complete description of the universe. The next thing I want to talk about in my tirade is that in public universities, at least, there is an incredible hypocrisy that no one seems to have noticed in the following way. You can preach religion in a public university as long as you preach negatively. And I'll demonstrate what I mean by that. Today my color is blue. Take, for example, the simple statement 4, and let's say 2 plus 2. Let's say someone says does not equal 4. Or you could say all the logical possibilities equals 5, or 2 plus 2 does not equal 5. So, I think those are kind of the logical options. So the point I want to make here is that to affirm that 2 and 2 are 4, to deny it, in this case, the affirmation is correct, the denial is incorrect. The affirmation is incorrect, the denial is correct. Now, what's interesting here is that all of these statements are in the same realm. These are all mathematical statements, right or wrong. You can make incorrect, right? Yeah, you can make math professor. You can make incorrect claims in the field of math. or in any other field. Now, consider, for example, a typical public university, like I went to Berkeley and UCLA. So in class, for example, let me make sure I record. You're allowed to say, for example, that Zeus actually is not, I'll just put RG, the rain god. But if you say Zeus is the rain god, then you'll be terminated, and unceremoniously. So, but my point is, just like in the math, to claim that Zeus is or is not or is the rain god, those are equally religious statements. I mean, to the extent that you consider the Greek gods religious. I mean, it's or these were equally statements about gods or God. If you said Jesus is the Son of God, or Jesus is not the Son of God, or Krishna is divine, or Krishna is not divine, or whatever, whether you affirm or deny it, you are equally making a religious claim or a metaphysical claim. So, for example, I remember years ago at UCLA, I was taking an anthropology course, and it was about anthropology is about the different tribes in the Amazon region. We were studying the Yanomami. And so they smoked this very pure, very powerful tobacco, not the kind of stuff you can kill yourself with here in America. And what's interesting is the teacher totally deconstructed the mystical visions and metaphysical claims of the shamans. I mean, they make claims about gods and things like that, and so the teacher, or for example, I mean, you read any book ever written about Greek history or Greek philosophy, and the Greeks, they worship these gods because, well, the Greeks, of course, not the earliest, but way back, people saw thunder and lightning and rain, and it frightened them, and they wanted to find some way to deal with the forces of nature, so they anthropomorphically imagined gods, and then they tried to placate these gods by sacrifice. And none of the people that wrote those books were actually there at the time. And they're denying, for example, that Zeus is a rain god, or Jupiter, or whatever, or Indra in India. So it's a religious claim. But you're allowed to do that. You're allowed to, because there's nothing. Let's say you get a PhD in Greek history, or a PhD in the history of India, or a PhD in any religion. There's nothing about that program that's going to reveal to you the ultimate nature of reality. And so the nature of modern public education is you can make religious claims as long as they're negative. But you cannot make positive claims. Just like there's blind faith, but not blind doubt. So I wanted to introduce that because just to kind of level the playing field, to use a great expression that I've learned from George W. Bush. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is, what is the relationship, let's say in the tradition that I have been involved with, Bhakti Yoga tradition, it's basically the monotheistic tradition of India. When Rudolf Otto, he was a great Protestant theologian that I think he went to India, and he was shocked to find that they had monotheism because he went there to save them from polytheism, and he was very disturbed to find that they already had that product. And not only they had monotheism, but they had very sophisticated theology. If you read the Vedanta tradition, and it's a very intellectually sophisticated tradition, and ultimately monotheistic. So, and the main text is, of course, Bhagavad Gita. There's many other texts. So, what is the relationship between human reason, our ability to analyze, to be rational, and faith and religion? What does the relationship say in Bhagavad Gita? And that's what I wanted to talk about. So you've all things must pass. There's a term, whoops, we're actually recording this, so I can watch myself very narcissistically. So, no, it's actually for other people. There's a term in Sanskrit which is Buddhi Yoga. And so I'll talk a little about this. We've all heard the word yoga, which nowadays in our culture really means basically South Asian calisthenics and stretching and stuff like that. But the physical part of yoga was originally just a preliminary exercise, because if you were going to sit and meditate for long periods of time, you get cramps. And so the idea was just to condition your body so that you could sit and actually do the yoga, which was a spiritual meditation. And that's a whole topic, actually, the whole yoga thing. But in any case, the word yoga comes from a Sanskrit root yuj, which means to connect, to engage, to employ, to link, and we still have that actually in reflections of that in English, in cognate words like con, from Latin means with, and in certain parts of India, the Y is pronounced J, so conjugal, which means intimate connection, and also the English word yoke, which is almost pure Sanskrit. Whoops, did I really? That's that. Yoke means to connect, to link. You yoke things together, and so these are cognate words with the English yuj, which is the source of the word yoga. So in this context, Buddhi yoga means a spiritual practice in which you connect to the truth. You connect yourself to a higher truth, and the word Buddhi back here is interesting. This word Buddhi comes from the same root, of course, as the word Buddha. There is a Sanskrit root which is Bud, which means to awaken, it also means to reason, to discern, and so on. And so I won't go into all the grammatic technicalities. I won't punish you in that way, even though I find them interesting. But so you have the word Buddha. Anyway, I won't tell you why that D gets in there. But so Buddha, controlling myself. The word Buddha means the awakened one or the enlightened one. And then in Sanskrit, you can make feminine nouns out of verbal roots by adding an ending suffix ending in I. So you get the word buddhi, a feminine word, which means enlightenment or awakening, intelligence, discernment, and so on. I mean, it's the same root as where you get, if you know the word shakti, which means energy. So this is the same feminine suffix. So anyway, Buddhi yoga is very interesting because in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna, presenting himself to planet Earth as God, Krishna says that you can approach me through Buddhi yoga by a spiritual practice which involves reasoning, actually spiritual reasoning, spiritual discernment. And I'll give you an example of what he means by that. The first example he gives in chapter 2 is where he starts speaking. Chapter 1 is Arjuna, his friend, getting everything wrong, and then the other 17 chapters are Krishna getting it right. So the first point Krishna makes is that you can reason your way to the understanding that you are not the physical body, you are actually a soul in the body. And an example Krishna gives, again, reasoning, is Sanskrit, so you can see what Sanskrit sounds like. Dehi nosmin jatha dehi komarang jovanamajara. That just as in this body, asmin dehi, just as in this body, we experience komaram, childhood, jovanam, youth, adolescence, magic time, and jara, old age. Jara, by the way, from which we get English words like geriatrics and all that. So jara means old age. So Krishna says, in the same way, you take another body. Now, what he means by this is that if you think about your childhood, all of us, we had a different body. It's not that your child body just stretched into your adult body. That's actually not what happened. It's actually a new body. We're replacing all the elements of the body constantly. Heraclitus says you can't step in the same river twice. And you could say you can't breathe in the same body twice. Because, in fact, that's really what the Buddha's focused on, this changing of everything. And when they say the void or emptiness, they don't mean that there's nothing here. They mean that there's no fixed object, because everything is constantly in flux. As far as the soul, I can't help throwing this in. If you study the second sermon of the Buddha, this is like just, day 2 of the grand opening of Buddhism. And so the second sermon has been known for thousands of years as a sermon on the non-existence of the soul. And if you read that sermon, the most striking thing is Buddha never said there's no soul. He simply said, is the physical body the eternal soul? Nope. What about the material mind? Nope. And he goes through a whole list of all these coverings, which come from actually Vedic literature, the Upanishads. He goes through all these things and finally says, none of these are the eternal soul. That's all, folks. And so he actually doesn't say there's no soul. This was an embarrassment, a problem for early Buddhists, that Buddha didn't get into metaphysics, never really denied the soul in God, just said he wouldn't talk about it. But then, of course, as is typical in the history of religions, we have followers who go beyond their master for various historical, socio-psychological reasons we won't go into now. But so the idea here is that when you were a child, that was you. That was really you. But the body's different. We have reincarnated many times in this, well, depending on how old you are. If you divide your age by 7, that's how many times you've reincarnated in this life. So the question is not, is there reincarnation? We've already done it, unless you're 6 years old. It just grew very quickly. So all of us have reincarnated in this life. The real question is, does the process continue when we die? Then, where do we go then? And of course, there's different eschatologies, different answers, but still, at least this point that the eternal soul, as Krishna describes it, is not the body. So you think by buddhi, by reason, you really couldn't be the body because A changes, B doesn't change. It was you. Like I was a child, you were a child. Obviously, we see the world differently in so many ways, but it was us. At the core, at the deepest level, it was me and it was you in the child's body, in the adolescent body, and so on. And so that persisting self that experiences different bodies, Krishna calls the self or the soul. So that's an example of reasoning to the conclusion that I must be something non-material. Also because, in a sense, we know like Descartes. Descartes. How do we pronounce that? Well, they say it in France. Anyway, Descartes. He, his famous cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. And so the fact of being conscious is the most immediate, you could say, the most irrefutable sign that I exist as an individual person. And so consciousness being such an important symptom of the soul, if you look at consciousness, it's not empirical. It's interesting, if nowadays, like philosophers and neurologists, some of them try to reduce consciousness and say it's just something that pops out of neurology. But that's absurd. And I actually attended this conference where one of the most famous philosophers of these things, John Searle, he gave this argument, which I thought, oh my God, I was a little embarrassed to hear this argument, because he said that if you mess with the brain, if you do things to your brain, it affects consciousness. But that could prove simply that consciousness, the nervous system conducts consciousness. For example, if I mess with these light fixtures or mess with the wires, it's going to affect the emission of light. Therefore, I could conclude that light bulbs produce light. Light comes from light bulbs. Because when I fiddle with the light bulb, it affects the emission of light. That's obviously absurd. And it's equally absurd to say that consciousness comes from the brain, because when you mess with the brain, you affect consciousness. It's just really bad philosophy, but no one notices it because of the, this materialistic eagerness that you find in academic circles. So therefore, that's an example of reasoning your way to the fact that you are not the body. I mean, obviously, because don't we all hold that, for example, let's say someone's accused of a crime, but someone says, they're extenuating circumstances, this person is rich, or this person's a good athlete, or this person is, very beautiful. No, your body doesn't matter. It's what you consciously did. Or if someone, let's say, has some physical challenges, it doesn't mean they're less of a person. Our whole legal equality. What's interesting is that our whole political, moral system is based on the assumption that we are not the body. Because equality is empirical nonsense. It's metaphysical wisdom, but it's empirical nonsense. And so anyway, this is just an example of reasoning. And the concept of eternal, when Krishna talks about an eternal soul in Bhagavad Gita, it's an interesting, it's more of a Parmenidean concept. Throw that out for you Greek philosophy lovers. In the sense that there are some views that you were created, you didn't exist, then you were created, and now you'll keep existing in heaven or hell. But the view that Krishna gives in Bhagavad Gita is that the self, or Atman, that's the word he uses, Atman, the self or the soul, has always existed. That's explicitly stated where Krishna says that never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these, he's talking about the battlefield, all these kings. And so the idea is that the soul exists in a different dimension. We are presently, the argument was given against Descartes, that if there's really like mind and body and they're different, consciousness and body, how could they interact? Poor argument, but it convinced all the European materialists. What Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita is that because matter and spirit both emanate from the same source, which is God, therefore they can interact, because they're sort of like what you call sister energies. Because the words for energy in Sanskrit are feminine, like Shakti or Prakriti and so on. It's like the same machine can produce heat or cold, climate control. Even though, like for the Greeks, if Greek philosophy, they never tired of discussing like heat and cold, opposing qualities and things like that. And so, but still, so if we emanate from the same source, then things equal to the same thing or equal to each other, we can actually interact. So the idea of eternal is that we as souls, as spiritual beings, all of us, are not material, and therefore we are not subject to the conditions of matter. Material things, as the Buddhists always explain, material things begin and end. Like this water bottle, the plastic in this water bottle, sorry about that, the plastic, or the water itself, 1,000 years ago, it might have been, who knows, some strands of hair in the beard of Attila the Hun. I don't know how I guess he was farther back than that, but. So there is no, like we call this water bottle, but it used to be something else, the same energy, the conservation of energy. It used to be something else, it'll eventually find its eternal home at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. Or actually on the floating of the Pacific Ocean, not even on the bottom. And so, so we, though, don't begin and end. And so we are outside the system of material time. That's the idea. That all material things, at least not yet all material forms, all particular transmutations or transformations of matter begin and end, like our bodies. But since we are not material things, we don't begin and we don't end. Parmenides, that was his, that was actually very clever of him. Plato appreciated it. Parmenides, he's famous for this point that it's kind of like a language mistake. Like the word something and the word nothing are equally words. Nothing is a word as much as something is a word. So they're positive existing linguistic things. However, nothing doesn't refer to anything. There is no object, there is no real thing that is referred to by the word nothing. And so when you say something comes from nothing, or something merged into nothing, it's ultimately just language confusion, because there is no nothing to come from. That was Parmenides' argument for the idea that, and of course, his, Zeno, his disciple, was led to all kinds of idiosyncratic arguments. But still, the idea here is that because if we are actually spiritual objects, and if we are somehow part of God, if we are somehow the energy of God, this is the language that you find in the Bhagavad Gita, that both matter and spirit are the energy of God, emanate from God. It's an emanation theory, which is popular actually even in Neoplatonism. Plotinus and Philo of Alexandria, that distinguished Jewish philosopher. So the idea being that even matter has always existed. Even, I realize it's more logical to say that it came from nothing, like physicists say. That's a joke. Anyway, so these guys need to read Parmenides, I think. They're like really clueless about this. So the idea is that matter also, because it's God's energy, it's an emanation, it's God's power, has always existed. But material forms are temporary. But the energy itself, to use the Greek term, the substance, substan, that which stands below, the substance is permanent. Energy has always existed, and we have always existed. The difference is that energy is always changing forms, protean, I think the word is, and whereas we are always the same spiritual entities. We become covered by the body. Hey, come on. Safe to seat for you. So, to give an example, let's say a traffic light. Here's a real common example: red, yellow, green. In fact, behind the red, yellow, and green coverings, it's all the same light. It's all white light or whatever you call it. But when the light passes through the red screen, it comes out red, yellow, green. But originally, it's all the same light. In the same way, the idea here, this is parsimony, a concept in philosophy that, and even in physics, that the simplest explanation, which actually accounts for something, is the best. And so, when you're in a child's body and your consciousness comes through the child's body, you experience it as child's consciousness. And when your consciousness comes to an adolescent body, obviously adolescent consciousness, or an adult body, or an artistic body, or whatever, male, female, this, that, the other, ethnicities and all this stuff. But all these forms of consciousness are just the conscious coming through a body. So the whole point of self-realization or yoga, I should also write bhakti yoga. Bhakti means devotion or love. And so the ultimate spiritual practice, frankly, as in Christianity, is pure love of God and other souls. So the idea is, the whole idea of meditation or spiritual practice is to, in the yoga, the Ashtanga yoga, is called pratyahara, or sort of like taking it back within it. So the idea is to go back inside and find your consciousness before it gets filtered through your body. Because when it's filtered through the body, we're going to end up thinking, I'm materially male, female, young, old, American, Bulgarian, whatever. But if we can get to consciousness, reach that consciousness, unfiltered by a temporary body, we find our real self, and we realize that we're part of God. And so that union between the soul and God is called yoga. That's what yoga actually means, but don't tell anyone. You don't want to hurt the economy, American economy, and it's big business. So anyway, and then, okay, last point, just to Krishna, the idea of Krishna, I'll explain very quickly what that word means within the tradition. I mean, sacred etymologies and historical linguistics often have different ideas, but I'll explain to you how it's seen within the tradition. The word Krish, or the verb, this verbal root, Krish, does actually mean to attract. I mean, think in English of the word traction, like a tractor, and attraction. You have the same thing in German. If you know German, Ziehung, Anziehung. So you have this connection where you have traction and attraction, where attraction means, if traction means to pull, attraction means to pull the mind. And so, same thing in Sanskrit. Krish means to attract, but also the word Krishna, for example, means agriculture, plowing, traction. But so the word Krish means attractive, and then na, within the tradition, is taken as an abbreviation for a verb nund, which means pleasure, like to give or experience pleasure. And the most famous form of this word is with the prefix ananda. If you've ever heard this word ananda, which means bliss. And so Krishna, therefore, within the sacred tradition, is taken to mean God, who is all attractive, infinitely beautiful, infinitely intelligent, infinitely strong, just infinitely attractive, the ultimate rock star. And Na is taken to be an abbreviation meaning the source of all pleasure. So it's the idea of God as infinitely beautiful, as infinitely fascinating, infinitely attractive. And Krishna is also considered to be a historical figure within the tradition who came to this world. Actually, what's his name? Aryabhatta was one of the great Indian astronomers about 1400 years ago. Actually, he's one of the founders of trigonometry. In fact, sine, cosine, and everything from trigonometry come from his Sanskrit terms, which went through Arabic. So he was smart. He was a smart guy. And Aryabhatta used archaeoastronomical calculations from ancient texts that describe in detail that when Krishna came to this world, exactly, how were the constellations, just what was the night sky. You have these precise descriptions. And he calculated that it refers to a time a little over 5,000 years ago. So Krishna actually, according to the tradition, came to this world, spoke Bhagavad Gita, and declared himself in the Bhagavad Gita to be God, in capital G. So it's interesting, in fact, and describing himself as God, who's a source of everything. There's an emphasis on God as a source of everything emanating from God. And also you find he gives, in a sense, what I would call an objective moral system, in the sense that what's interesting is that in the Bhagavad Gita, in order to have a good life, to be happy, wise in this world, and to have a better next life, there's no doctrinal requirement. You don't have to accept Krishna. It's interesting because the Buddhists, if you look at, because there were great theological battles thousands of years ago in India between Buddhists and the Vaishnavas, people who followed Krishna, and other groups as well. There were other groups. And the Buddhists argued that their karma theory was better than in the theistic camp because, just like Plato's argument against the gods, against Homer in the Republic, he said that in Buddhist karma theory, the reaction you get, the karma you get, is objective. It's fair. It just depends on the moral quality of your behavior. You get what you deserve. Whereas on the Hindu or theistic side, you have these whimsical gods, petulant whimsical gods like Zeus, typical thing. I'm gonna smash that guy down there, in the battle. Well, why Zeus? I don't like him. I don't like him. It's so just like this real adolescent. So, but actually, if you read Bhagavad Gita, your karma, the reactions you get, what happens to you, has nothing to do with believing in Krishna. For example, there's a term sattva. I mean, obviously, if you do accept God, there are special spiritual rewards for that. But still, sattva means goodness. So, and here it refers to, you could say, material goodness, just being a good person, apart from any spiritual or religious dimension, just being a good person. And so if you are a good person, sattva, Krishna says, for example, urdhvam gachanti sattvasta. Those who stand in goodness are elevated in their next life. Or sattvat sanjayate sukham, that from goodness comes happiness. Great line in Pride and Prejudice, that movie. Anyway, where Lizzie says to Jane, I will not have your happiness until I have your goodness. But anyway, so happiness comes from goodness. And wisdom, tasmat sattam, nirmalatvat, prakashakam, anamayam. That sattva, goodness, is enlightening. It's by nature, it makes you wise. So this is not a sectarian thing. It's not a jealous God. It's a God who says that if you don't accept me, but you're a good person, you'll be rewarded. But if you want to come to me, then you have to accept me. Otherwise, how can I accept you? And so it's, I guess you could say, a liberal view, not in the modern political sense. I don't want to be partisan here, but so that's the idea of a God who's infinitely beautiful and whom is infinitely lovable. It's like you fall in love with someone, but then there's always the problem. You get to know them. And so, some relationships actually survive mutual understanding. And those are the really great ones. So, but the idea is that your love can only expand as much as the object of your love is great. For example, if you shine a light in a box, the light rays can't expand. If you shine a light into the universe, the light can expand. So when you love an object, infinitely lovable, then your love can expand infinitely. And ultimately, isn't it the greatest pleasure in life is loving? I mean, You know that song Alfie? I don't know how many of you know that. Without true love, you're nothing, Alfie. It's a great song, Burt Bacharach. So that's the idea, that what greater pleasure is there than to really, really, truly be in love and have that love reciprocated. And to have that love be intelligent, virtuous, not blind, not like blind attachment, not just like the endorphins have taken over, but, with your eyes open, intelligent, virtuous, wise, you're in love. And that's basically what bhakti means. And of course, this is not sectarian. These same ideas are found in other traditions, of course, and they're true in other traditions. So, anyway, that's, I guess that's all, folks, as they say. But, so if you have any questions, yes, please.
You said that in Krishna's world, I'm a Buddhist, and I'm from Sri Lanka.
Ah,
So,
namaste.
I was. So now, if the God is unconditionally loved and everything, like He's everything, and love is the superior level, and everything is the love and kindness, and everything is superior level. In that case, if I'm not accepting the God, and I'll be the good person, regardless of my view, shouldn't He accept me?
He does. Krishna says, that was my point. Krishna says that if you don't accept him, but you're a good person, you'll be rewarded for your goodness.
Okay, so and then I'll be good and I will accept him. What's next?
What's next?
Yeah,
Oh,
more good.
now we can do business. The idea is what Krishna says in the Gita, Jejata Mam Prapadyante, that I reciprocate with all souls. So, for example, let's say you have a child, and obviously you love your child. Well, not you, I don't want to wish this on you, but let's say someone has a child and they love their child, but the child, for some reason leaves home. There are children who don't appreciate good parents. That has happened in the past. And so, what can you do? What can the parent do? Obviously, the parent will always welcome the child back, but I remember something it was kind of really sad. When I went to Berkeley in the late 60s, I was in the middle of all that stuff. And there were so many children running away. They were like runaways. There were so many that there was a local newspaper in Berkeley, which is kind of like the hip counterculture, hippie radical newspaper called the Berkeley Bar. And what basically financed it was that the last 5 pages of the paper were just classified ads from parents trying to find their children. And they were really there's real pathos, typical ad back then would be like, Johnny, please come home, everything's forgiven. Or, Susie, your room is still there. It was really kind of, it was really tragic in a sense. And so you see the love of these parents just desperately trying to find their children. So, God, if God is an infinite being, God possesses infinite love. God loves us infinitely. And so therefore, God will reciprocate with you on your terms. In other words, you have free will and you have to decide how it goes. If you just want to be virtuous and not theistic, okay, then that's what it is. And then you'll be rewarded for your virtue.
So isn't He created that system?
That what?
Isn't the God that who created that system for us?
I will bring up a great question Plato asked through Socrates, which I think gets to the heart of your question. And this is in a dialogue called the Euthyphro. Yay. So, yeah, exactly. Are certain actions good? Are certain actions good because the gods love them? Or do the gods love those actions because they are good? And so the idea here is that there is an objective moral order, that God does not whimsically impose his or her their taste upon you. It's not like it turns out God loves vanilla ice cream, so if you don't love vanilla ice cream, you will never go to heaven. It's not like that. God is not imposing whims or predilections on you. There's an objective moral order where if you gratuitously harm an innocent person, that's bad. It really is bad. Or if you do good, if you help. So if you look at Krishna's whole description of what's good and bad, and the way he gets at morality is through this tripartite system in the Gita, what are called gunas, or qualities of behavior, qualities of consciousness. And the three qualities are goodness, passion, and ignorance. So, for example, take charity. In ignorance, you just like, hey, I got some extra heroin. Do you want some? And so, okay, you're generous, but that would be considered charity in ignorance because you ignore the consequences of your charity. Passion means, let's say I give something, like say I donate to a college, but I want my name on the building. That has actually happened. And so you give charity, but you're really serving yourself through charity. And yet you like to give. It's like, if I'm going to serve myself, I'll do it nicely by charity. But goodness means you give, as Krishna says, datavyamiti, because it's the right thing to do. You give because you should give, because it's the right thing to do. And he specifically says, hinupakarine, that there is no expectation or desire on your part to get something in return. It's actual giving. And so if we think about that, and he analyzes practically everything in these three things, goodness, passion, and ignorance. And so it's subjective. I think any reasonable person can see that, yeah, it is like that. And so it's not, again, not God imposing some whimsical system, but really, this gets back to the Stoic idea of logos, the logos theory. I found this fascinating, that there was a very popular idea in the classical world among the pagans. I'm a pagan fan, but anyway. So the logos meant like the logic of something or reason. And so the idea was that God is a rational creature, infinitely rational. And therefore, when God creates the world, he invests in the world his own divine reason. That's why you can have an ology. You can have physiology and biology and geology. Among scholars, the tragedy is that the bad guys got the astrology word. They haven't gotten over that yet. They're stuck with astronomy. And the bad guys got the ology word. But anyway, so the reason we can study all these things is because in every facet of life, whether it's geology, physiology, biology, this ology, that ology, you find reason, you find logic, laws of nature. And so we, of course, that same logos is within us. The reason we can discover the logic, the reason, in everything is because the logos is in us. So when we study nature, it's like during the Renaissance, they began to say that actually God gave us two books, the Bible and the book of nature. And so you get natural theology, which you can take too far, of course, but by studying nature, science even, or humanity or psychology, whatever, you're discovering the logos originally in God's mind and then invested in all things.
So is Krishna is the God, or the Brahma is the God?
Oh, there's a word Brahman. There's two words. Oops. Don't want to miss a second of myself. So there's a Sanskrit word, Brahman, with an N or without the N. It's a neuter. And it comes from the Sanskrit root, breed, which means to expand or increase. And so Brahman is taken to mean the greatest, the absolute. It's a common word in Sanskrit philosophy meaning the absolute or the spirit. There's a masculine word which grammatically takes a long A, Brahma, which means the God that creates the universe. And so this Brahma, in the masculine sense, the creator God, is just the demiurgos of Plato in the Timaeus, isn't it? In the sense of, well, maybe, but you'll have to tell me how much it's like that, but that was my impression. It's just like a cosmic engineer. He's not the supreme God, but he's someone who's empowered to engineer the universe, to create the universe under God. And then when you take Brahman in the neuter sense, meaning just the absolute truth, Krishna states in the Bhagavad Gita that, actually Arjuna says to Krishna, and Krishna doesn't disagree with him. He says to Krishna that you are the Parang Brahma. Parang means supreme or highest, that you are the highest absolute. And so you have these categories of Brahman. We are also Brahman, we are also spirit. at the same time, there's a supreme spirit, or the highest spirit, which is Krishna. That's the idea. But it's very interesting because Krishna teaches something in the Gita that he reciprocates with all worshippers. In other words, if a particular worshipper, in whatever tradition, wants to see God in a certain way or is attracted to God in a certain way, that Krishna says, I reciprocate with that person and actually make that person's faith strong. So if you think about it, the exercise of free will would require that, because if someone wants to pursue a particular theology or a particular concept of God, then God will reciprocate, and that person will have that experience of God from that angle. Yes, I'm sorry.
I read that Brian Green book called The Elegant Universe.
Brian
Green. It's about.
He's actually the brother of a good friend of mine.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
as it so happens.
he kept talking about the latest in string theory and then the thing after that, and he kept starting it out saying, well, if you start out with the Newtonian, this is very weird. And I kept thinking, well, why did you start out there? I kept thinking, if you start out with energy, like in Hindu, it all, flows. It's just about, these are the patterns according to which the energy flows. And we're finding patterns at every level. And if you just had that paradigm shift to something more like Hinduism,
Yeah.
you wouldn't be surprised every time, right?
No, true, and his brother keeps telling him that.
Oh.
And
Okay.
no, it's true, because actually in the Sanskrit literature, they talk about literally billions of universes, billions of parallel universes. So I think it was Carl Sagan, who was an atheist, who flirted with belief, but then didn't marry. He just went back on his deathbed. But so he said that this Sanskrit or Vedic or Indian or Hindu cosmology is the only one of ancient civilizations that has the same size. I'm talking about billions of universes, and it's what's on the same scale as modern cosmology.
Well, the idea is that a Hindu metaphysics then might be the closest to contemporary physics.
Yes.
Right? So that they match better.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I think that's true. There was very interesting discussion in Christian history, actually, in the 4th century, in 300s, when you had the great debate between the Arians and the Trinitarians, and they really got into very heavy-duty ontology and metaphysics and ousios or something like that, and all these Greek words like the nature of existence and to what extent are entities one, to what extent are they different, and there's very sophisticated metaphysics, which is, of course, now no one reads anymore, but yeah, I think there is a lot there. There is a lot there. It's how should I put it? The spiritual side of life and say the empirical, they're not at war. The war really started, to be honest, sort of with the Protestant Reformation. Luther, sola scriptura, sola fide, only scripture, only faith. And even Galileo, who apparently was, obviously a victim, but an obnoxious one, if you actually study the history. But there was a time in the Renaissance, in the early Renaissance, when the Church, Vatican, when there was one church in Western Europe, was actually probably the greatest patron of the new science. Aquinas is very bold, because now Thomas Aquinas, so that's quaint, but actually Thomas Aquinas, the idea of basing theology on a pagan system, Aristotle was actually very bold and groundbreaking.
He almost would have been accused of heresy.
Yeah.
That the other people were in power.
Exactly. So if you look at the high Middle Ages, going into the early Renaissance, the church was kind of cool. They were okay with that. Yeah, let's go. They were helping to fund all this new stuff. But then with the Protestant Reformation and Luther sort of rejecting, because after all, the Renaissance, don't forget, was a rebirth of not only pagan culture, but Southern European culture. So I see the Reformation, to some extent, it's obviously many things, but it's also a North European backlash against the revival of Southern European culture and pagan culture. And so the way I put it is that when science and religion divorced, it was religion that filed the divorce papers. And it's like one of those typical cases where, in a marriage, one of the person rejects a loving spouse, divorces, and then the person who was rejected finds a great life, a better person, and the person who proudly rejected their spouse ends up miserable. Oh, I still love you. It was the biggest mistake of my life. Sorry, Charlie. So,
And they blame the one.
yeah. So that's actually what happened. Because, if you look at, decades after Newton, the best universities in Europe were teaching Ptolemaic astronomy. And then once the secularists took power, they kicked the religious people out of the university. So the university was kind of like the university system in the West kind of bounced back and forth between fanaticisms. And my suggestion is we have to move forward now dialectically to a synthesis where we reunify knowledge, because there's only one reality. It obviously has a metaphysical dimension, equality, justice, all that stuff. So, everyone's just trying to get knowledge. We have to stop the war.
Well, there's a difference between wisdom and knowledge.
True.
Right? So the ancient wisdom traditions start out with energy. Aristotle's nous is pure energy. And then everything else is pattern recognition. Right? Recognizing all these patterns.
Yeah, Aristotle, all those Greeks, they were actually much, much closer to the ancient Indian tradition than us. They were like...
Yes, because it's gotten read into some.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody
Even
knows.
Parmenides, if you look at 2,500 years ago with Confucius and Buddha and Empedocles and Socrates and all these people, and Parmenides is espousing ideas which are very much at home in the Indian tradition. I don't say he got them from there, but anyway.
We should probably
Wrap it up.
yeah.
Anyway, thank you all very much. It's really a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for coming.